Ladies and gentlemen, independent Americans around the country and around the world. The weather in New York City today and in many parts of the country is beautiful, but the times, in my view, are dark and growing darker and very serious. And this show has always had a unique focus on national security, veterans, military affairs. And when everything started going sideways in many ways or forward in many ways this week, there was one guest that I wanted to talk to that I think could help us make sense of it and help us anticipate what's coming next. I think she's been a conscience for America for decades, especially on national security issues. The great and powerful Barbara Starr is back on Independent Americans. Welcome back, my friend.
Hey there, how are you?
I'm better than America right now.
Yeah, that's as somebody said on Twitter this week, wake up and smell the First Amendment in the morning.
Mm. There's so much to get into. You have so much important experience. And especially, I want to unpack the way America's seeing this right now and understanding this. But let's start with the question I ask everybody, no matter what's happening. Barbara Starr, where are you and how are you?
Well, I'm in the metropolitan Washington, D.C. area. And like I think almost everybody who lives here, getting right to the news, looking at preparations all over town for the military parade on Saturday and discovering roads will be closed, bridges will be closed. It will be very tough. The airport will be closed. It is going to be very tough for Americans to freely move around this city, not just Saturday, but probably for a few days before and after once they start cleaning it all up. The parade, uh, you can decide for yourself, everybody, if you think it's for the birthday of the army or for Donald Trump, but it is going to disrupt the free movement of life in the nation's capital.
Barbara, how do you feel about that? I mean, you've been such an analytical wizard for many decades, and I was on CNN last night at the late hour, and I was wishing that CNN could say, "Let's go now to Barbara Starr at the Pentagon." And they can't do that now. But how do you feel about what's happening right now?
Um, Extremely disturbed and very sad. I think one of the real questions is, and I think you touched on it at the very beginning, how are Americans seeing this? There is the MAGA Republican conservative voting base in this country. It is growing. There's and the growing voices that are against illegal immigration in this country, and there's no indication that's going to ease up. But I would caution everybody needs to pay attention to all of this because you may wake up one morning and it will have slipped over the edge into something that nobody wants. And the people, you know this, Paul, the people who say, oh, President Trump is just talking. Well, I think evidence shows over the last several years, when he says something, he means it. And he's going to start moving ICE and potentially National Guard into other cities across America, so-called blue cities. My question is, okay, illegal immigration is absolutely something that needs to be dealt with, but do you want armed Marines on your street going house to house? Do you really want that?
I think that's really important because through the prism right now for most Americans, even if you live in LA, it's not in your neighborhood, right? For the most part, it feels far away. It feels like the other, and it's easy to say, yeah, I want the National Guard to go in and I want the Marines to go in. But what if you live in Tuscaloosa, or what if you live in Houston, or what if you live in Miami? And in my view, that's part of Trump's plan, and he's on plan. LA is what he's chosen to make the first step. But I want to go back to DC because I think this is really important and you have a unique understanding. Barbara, the parade I've spoken out about at length and how it's unprecedented and, in my view, un-American. But is there a possibility, I want to talk about what's next, that he just keeps it like this? After the parade ends, he keeps the Capitol locked down on some level of defensive posture, like he's done in the parade. Is that a possible next step? Is anybody at the Pentagon concerned about whether he'll leave some of these things and structures behind to kind of fortify DC as these things continue to unfold?
Well, the president may have given a hint about all that, Paul, the other day. And I'm going to paraphrase him, but when he said, uh, he just pretty much outright said, protesters against the parade, there will be a crackdown on them. Now, he didn't differentiate between violent protesters, troublemakers, people who engage in violence out there, and legitimate Americans exercising their First Amendment free right of speech. So the fact that he didn't distinguish between that and just talked about a crackdown of those who protest the parade, as an American citizen and someone who's watched Trump, obviously, as a journalist over the years, I find pretty darn concerning. I don't think he's ruled anything out. What we have seen, they say it's for the parade, but make no mistake, you can find the videos. There are tanks moving on the streets of Washington, D.C., moving into position for the parade, but tanks are on the streets. That's something no one should take lightly, in my opinion.
And I don't think there's enough imagination. I don't think people are respecting the strategic momentum and focus that Trump has right now. He's moving, in my view, methodically, all the way going back to installing Hegseth and removing the Joint Chiefs, and then now escalating the use of force in a way we've never seen. And I want to get your opinion on the National Guard and the federalization of them, and separately the active duty troops. But I want to stay on DC. I mean, he can just say, "Hey, the protesters are getting too violent. The risk is too high. There's a threat to Congress and DC," and just keep those tanks there, right? He could keep those Bradley vehicles there and keep those troops there and say, "Hey, we need to extend your orders for another 30 days." It's just going to be 30 days, but 30 days could become 60 days, become 90 days, and it could look like Fortress DC.
I think he has what he perceives as the legal authority to do that. The question, of course, is who will speak up against him. The mayor of Washington, D.C., she has very strong opinions, but I think everyone would agree she has limited authority and power to challenge the president. We've seen no evidence that congressional Republicans are going to challenge him. And that's really the question. Does he just simply keep going? And I'm going to digress for 1 second here, and we can get into it more. But the president's remarks at Fort Bragg yesterday, which were so political in front of a military audience, which were so goading, insulting President Biden, insulting almost anybody, everybody who didn't agree with him, and getting the troops to, whoop and holler and clap and cheer him in a very political fashion. To me, that is the single most troubling signal, because we are not seeing the general officers do anything about that right now. They are silent, and they know that is not the way the US military works. They know they have to command troops that are apolitical. How do they do that in this environment? It's a stunning question.
So we're recording this on Wednesday. It'll drop on Thursday. As of now, there's been nobody inside the military that's spoken out. There haven't even been that many, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs and SecDefs that have spoken out. Usually it takes 48 hours for them to get some letter together, right? Which I would anticipate is coming, and it'll be a warning. But I want to come back to what I think is really such an important point here. This is part of the strategy to co-opt the troops, to make them look like his troops, to have them boo the media and do things that has never been done before. Barbara, who can stop it? Is it just the way the structure works? It's like he's going to run over the mayor. I think he's going to run over Newsom. He's going to run over Republicans who don't fall in line, and most of them will. He's going to run over Democrats. In your view, understanding the levers of power, understanding the way our military works, who can stop him right now and slow him down, even from just at a very basic level, saying these are my troops, and in essence, driving the popularity of our troops to a level of low that we've probably never seen before. People are scared of our troops now. They're worried that they could come into their neighborhoods. But who can stop this in your view?
Well, I think we've seen over time for Trump, what leads him to change his mind on things or pull back is his own political calculus. Let me make a couple of points here. If he sees that this begins to hurt him, that's usually the point at which he pulls back. But I honestly don't see that happening because we have so many Americans who are in favor of tamping down on illegal immigration. I come back to this. That's a perfectly legitimate point of view, but I'm not sure all of them see the price being paid for that right now. But that's usually when he changes, and then eventually he gives it a couple of months and he circles back. So I don't know. Will Republicans do anything about it? Did you? I don't know if you saw it, but yesterday, Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, in line in the succession for the presidency in the event of a crisis, Mike Johnson publicly said California Governor Gavin Newsom should be tarred and feathered for his opposition to for how he's handling the situation in California. Tarred and feathered, a call to violence against an elected official in this country. If the circumstances had been reversed and it was a Democrat suggesting violence on a Republican, can you only imagine? And rightfully so, it should be investigated. Mike Johnson will have no repercussions from making this, in my view, completely outrageous statement. So, what else could stop Donald Trump? I'm going to rely on, if you'll permit me to say, my peeps, journalists, the free press in this country. And sadly, we hope it never comes to the point when the free press is there on the streets of America and sees disaster strike. And of course, that would be the loss of life on the street. We don't want to see that at all. But the important point here is the press corps will be there. They can say all they want, but you do not see the retreat of the press corps in covering this story. They can pressure networks, they can sue them, they can get all their little financial settlements, they can try and get people fired, but there are reporters stepping up to the plate. And as long as we have that, I have some sense of optimism.
But they're also consolidating their messaging machine and they're creating an alternative reality where some folks watch CNN and BBC, but more and more folks watch Newsmax and OWN and Fox, or just listen directly to the president or Pete Hegseth, right? And Hegseth has now consolidated his messaging. He doesn't do any press conferences, even this week. He's deploying federal troops on U.S. soil, no press conference, which is unprecedented. They're going to limit press access. So they're going to isolate the press. Maybe they'll arrest the press. Maybe they'll definitely demonize the press. But I would expect the press to get kind of smushed even smaller and smaller at a time when MSNBC, CNN, and others see declining ratings, right? See a crisis of their business model. I mean, you and I talked beforehand about Substack, about alternative and independent media, and how important that's going to be. But I want to go back to leaders in particular. Don Bacon is out there, right? Like former Air Force general who's kind of bucked Trump at times. Lindsey Graham recently broke with Trump on Ukraine. I'm not counting on him. There are, the Democrats like Tammy Duckworth who've worn the uniform. But he also hasn't gotten to some of the governors and mayors that have military experience. I'm thinking about Tim Walz. I'm thinking about Wes Moore. Do you see any of those leaders as being more effective in countering this narrative and challenging him? It's one thing to have Gavin Newsom countering Trump every day, but what if it's 82nd Airborne veteran Wes Moore? Do you see anybody else like that that can kind of shift the narrative or counter the narrative of reality?
I think it's going to be very tough. I think what it's going to take is something that's almost impossible, and that is the voice of active duty four-star generals. There's an article in Atlantic entitled
Yep.
The Silence of the Generals uh, after Fort Bragg yesterday, again, where Trump crossed the line of what troops under regulation are allowed to participate in. And so far, we have silence. Uh, Mark Milley, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, who's now been vilified by Trump, who suggests he's going to investigate him for treason at times, but got a pardon for a proactive pardon from President Biden, I believe. Milley was the voice. He would talk about without referencing Trump, he would talk about the troops serve the people. The troops swear an oath to the Constitution, not to a president. The troops are there to defend the First Amendment. We are going to need to see four-star generals stand up in this country and say that. They can do it without challenging Trump directly. All they have to do is speak truth to power, that the American armed forces serve the people of this country and serve the Constitution. That's what needs to be said again and again and again. And right now, the one person we have never heard from on this is the current chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Dan Kane. By all accounts, a perfectly respectable four-star, but I do wonder how long he can stay silent, at what point he is going to need to speak up and speak about the Constitution.
So, Barbara, we know what's happening now, right? There are probably isolated conversations in the Pentagon where
Sure.
generals are saying that, right? Or they're
Right.
talking
What
to
do we
each
do?
other.
We can't do anything. Right.
Or like, how do we pick our spots? How do we keep them in check, right? There's always this kind of negotiation with their own constraints. And what we've never seen is what you've seen in other Western countries where a general quits and walks out and walks over to 60 Minutes or goes public, right? And we know what'll happen. Hegseth will fire him or her. They'll vilify them. They'll demonize them. They'll Fauci them like they did to Milley. But it feels like we keep waiting for the white knights to ride out that never do. In this professional military, they never do it. We'll more likely see it from lieutenants or from sergeants. And there are calls from the left for these people to resist. But as of now, correct me if I'm wrong, these are not unlawful orders. They could argue that they're lawful orders. It's a really hard thing for a 19-year-old private to say, this is an unlawful order when he deployed me to a street. Now, if they escalate it, that becomes a different story. But I want to ask you to go back to maybe the point that I think is really, the couple points I think are really, really strategically important. Number one, he sent the National Guard, he federalized the National Guard in California and activated them against the wishes of the governor, right? Which is really important. LAPD said no, governor said no. He did it anyway. He took them, which he can do, right, under Title 10, made them his, and put them out there. Can you talk about that? Right, because that can happen again in other places. If the governor of New York, Kathy Hochul, says no, if Governor Pritzker in Illinois says no, he can do the same thing. And then in other states, red states, Huckabee in Arkansas has already said, I'd love to have them. I think Governor Abbott in Texas says, I'd love to have them. So we'll have this balkanization of red states and blue states where their commander in chief of their National Guard wants them in the streets. And then it's right one state over, they don't. So that's a level of military civil divide we've never seen and a pressure on our military system we've never seen. But can you talk about your view on the danger of that piece specifically, where our National Guard troops especially are going to become caught in this political tug of war?
Wow. If I only could have a magic solution, and I don't. I mean, I think you're right. This is the critical problem. And this comes to the real bottom line. Under President Trump, he is fundamentally changing the nature of the United States military. Hegseth likes to talk about, oh, we're now more lethal. We have great weapons, fit. We focus on fitness. We're not woke. We're not worried about pronouns. We're not worried about diversity. I could argue you should worry about diversity, by the way. That's another whole subject. So they like to think they're on the right track, but there is this balkanization. And I am not convinced that Americans who voted for Trump clearly voted for him to deal with illegal immigration. Did they vote really for a change, a fundamental skirting the Constitution change in the very nature of the US military? Because hopefully never happens, but you and I both know the chances are sometime there will be that 3 a.m. phone call. Troops will have to go overseas on an emergency basis and engage in a level of operations, whether it's outright combat or some other level of operations in that general arena. And you're going to want them ready, able, the best, etc., and not be having a conversation about constitutional authorities. And I think anything, when Hegg talks about lethality, okay, anything that takes away from being able to engage in combat on a moment's notice, should it become necessary, I think is a bad idea. And right now, you can't convince me that this is not jeopardizing that ability. He talks about,
There's one scenario I just want to put out there for the sake of conversation out into the universe, right? So this is going to continue to unfold in LA. LA is going to have wildfires. Summer's here. There are always wildfires. And who do you deploy in California to wildfires? The National Guard. So now you're going to have a fight between Gavin Newsom, who says, I need the National Guard to fight fires. And the people of the state are going to see the fires. They're going to smell the smoke. And Trump's going to say, yeah, but I want them to quell protesters and to support ICE and to do what I want to do. I mean, this is a very possible scenario in the next 30 to 60 days that
or
could endanger
hurricanes,
our not just our national security, but our local safety, right? Like very imminent safety with fires rolling down the hill, and you don't have the National Guard, or you don't have enough of them because they're so overextended.
hurricanes in the south, flooding, all the contingencies uh, that the National Guard performs in this country that are so important. And by the way, you and I both know some of the real strength of the National Guard is, in fact, they come from American communities. They know, uh, they know where the people, they know the communities, they know the culture. They're part of the community. These are not foreign troops, but they're not trained to go in. They supposedly they're there to protect federal authorities, the ICE people, and protect federal facilities, but they are not there to engage in any kind of law enforcement or uh, I don't know how to put it really, any type of activity that could lead to violence between them and the people of Los Angeles. That is not what they're there for. And that should never happen.
Right.
So, how will the president respond if there is one of these very legitimate contingencies where they need the National Guard? And then people are going to wonder, where are they?
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing that, when I say, when the cost becomes too high to Trump politically, we'll see if he pulls back. But I don't
See, I
think
don't think, yeah,
he
I
won't
don't,
pull back
I
forever.
don't think so. I think he's willing to
Over
endure that cost. I think he's going to roll because I think
Yep.
he's thinking longer term. He's thinking, you know what? I may not have to worry about the 2026 elections
Yeah.
because I don't
What is he
have
there?
them. I can declare martial law. I can try to get rid of the elections. I can try to take over I mean, I think there's a continued failure of imagination, and people assume that Trump cares about poll numbers. I mean, if you rig an election, you can have poll numbers look great, right? Ask Saddam Hussein or Vladimir Putin. And I think that there's a playbook he can pull from there. But there's also another piece that I think you and I both know, Barbara, which is the National Guard is wonderful in many ways, but also has challenges. And I saw this when I was in Iraq and a hurricane hit. National Guardsmen wanted to be home. They wanted to be back in Louisiana where their homes were being destroyed. Now, when homes start being destroyed by hurricanes, when floods start happening, when fires start happening, when people just don't want to go and they don't show up for a deployment in the National Guard, that I think is a crisis point that we may have to anticipate. We don't know what level of responsiveness they've gotten from everybody they've called up, right? They probably called up a pretty full unit. But as you go deeper into the National Guard, what happens when only 70% show up or only 8 or 90%? What about the other 10% who either don't want to go or say, I am conflicted because there's a wildfire in my backyard? I mean, I don't think that that's something that people outside the guard and the military are considering as a possible reality.
I think that's right. And it gets to that point of, when does the political cost become too high? I don't think he ever abandons the idea, but I think there could come a point in the near term. And going back full circle to Los Angeles, as we now all understand, and I should say, Los Angeles is my hometown. I grew up there. My dad worked downtown in the garment district for many years. I know that city. I know the off ramps on the freeway that they're talking about. Los Angeles has an incredible, rich immigrant culture, Hispanic, Latino, Asian. uh, from South America, from all over the world, and especially Hispanic. And the National Guard draws on some of these communities to make up their forces. These young people want to join the National Guard, get benefits, be part of something. Uh, we will see. We will see very cautiously if this were to grow, what that National Guard response in California will be. These are people who are part of the Los Angeles culture, part of the Southern California culture, all the way down to 29 Palms and Palm Springs, where the Marines are coming from. This is home to them in the National Guard. So we'll see over time how this begins to sort out.
Barbara, can you talk about the other part of this? Because the National Guard troops are now federal troops, but you've also got active duty troops, right? Now, the 82nd is going to be deployed, or whoever, right, is going to be sent in. We got Marines, active duty Marines going in LA because they're probably because they're the closest, right? And they're the easiest to get there quickly. But we're now looking at not just a scenario, but a reality where he does use federal troops on U.S. soil. I've sounded all the alarms about this. I think this is the equivalent of breaking glass, right? You break glass in emergency only. I said this on CNN last night. I was deployed on U.S. soil, but it was after 9/11. And this is not after 9/11. This is something different. But can you talk about that piece specifically and just how, I mean, I think people are going to understand how unprecedented it is, but your view on maybe how you feel about it, what you think about it, and how you think people who can't speak that you know in the Pentagon feel about that element specifically, Marines being sent to LA.
I suspect there is great unease. Yesterday, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, General Eric Smith, testified before Congress. It didn't get a lot of notice, but he was very sober minded about all of this. This is a man who speaks with, he's the 4-star head of the Marine Corps. This is a man who speaks with great precision and is, as you would expect from a 4-star Marine, calm as ice, if that's a frozen water, not ice.
Right, right.
He was very circumspect, and he talked about the fact he did not expect the Marines to be involved in anything beyond the narrow mission of protecting federal troops and federal property. Um, I you know he so Americans might ask, so if the top brass were to get so concerned, why don't they just resign and protest? And you and I both know the answer. You resign and protest, you're a headline for 24 hours, and then they bring in they fire you, and or you have resigned, and they just bring in somebody else more aligned with their own philosophy.
Yep.
But Hegseth is going to have to make some effort to be effective. And that is coming for him. He hasn't had to worry about it so much. He's going to have to be effective amongst the Joint Chiefs. He's going to have to operate as a voice that they will listen to and not quietly figure out how to work their way around. So I think there's an awful lot still to play out here.
Without him calling it a coup, which is what, it won't take much for Hegseth to jump at that word, right? I think he will use that to demonize and to freeze opposition in the uniformed services that we should all anticipate. But the leaks are everywhere. Even before this happened, Hegseth's over former staff was eating their own. They're leaking constantly. He's got half of his communications staff gone. So he's trying to hold it together, but they have this bully pulpit and these tools that they keep using, and saying that you're not patriotic, saying you're not supporting the president. That chilling effect is a tool that he uses constantly. Let me ask you this, maybe to wrap it back together, and thank you, Barbara, for all of this. I hope I can get you on more often as this continues to unfold. What's next? We're not talking about Ukraine. We're not talking about North Korea. We're not talking about our foreign enemies. And in many ways, I think our enemies are celebrating. This is like a dream for Osama bin Laden. But as this plays out, and let's assume it continues to expand the way Trump says it's going to be, what's next? What does it look like? What are the guardrails, or what do you see as the most, dangerous course of action and the most likely course of action?
Well, you know, I sort of think about this in terms of Washington and politics. And I think it is absolutely critical that the Republicans stand up, speak, and be heard. I don't think right now um, that's very likely, given the fact that, again, Mike Johnson felt perfectly free yesterday saying Gavin Newsom should be tarred and feathered. He didn't think he would get any pushback from his own Republicans in Congress, and he really didn't. The Republicans in Congress, as we get closer to the midterms, are going to be evaluating how things look in their own districts, what kind of support they have, what their voters look like in their districts, and whether they think they're going to be reelected. So I think politics will play a part in this. I think we will see over the coming months, but it won't happen fast enough. That's the problem. The Republicans evaluate whether they need to speak out more. Hopefully, they will because it's the right thing to do. But it's going to take time, which, of course, on the streets of American cities, there may not be. I think we will see more protests. Hopefully, they stay peaceful. That is when they are their most powerful. We see that going all the way back to the civil rights movement and the anti war protests against the war in Vietnam. Americans protesting on the streets is nothing new. I think it should be celebrated. It's what the First Amendment is about. As long as they stay peaceful, they don't destroy property. Um, that's what this country is all about. You have the right to go out there on the streets and speak your mind in a peaceful manner. And hopefully, that is going to be the ultimate thing that will be the ultimate tool of power.
I share that hope, but I also am balanced in the reality that we've got a president who doesn't want to turn things down. Right, this is the first time where it seems like we've got a president that wants to escalate, that wants to turn up the heat.
Let me just jump in. That's right. Where are we seeing the conversation about
Yeah,
de-escalation?
yeah,
And that's the problem. That's
yeah.
that's the danger.
This is careening toward political and civil mutually assured destruction. I mean, I would love to say that our military is going to be absolutely perfect and absolutely disciplined and make no mistakes. And I would love to say that the discipline is going to be the same for the protesters. But I think any of us who've been in these complex situations when guns are involved knows that things go sideways, right? And when heads aren't cool, especially at the top, they go sideways faster and more extensively. So what I've
And
been
that's what Pete Hegseth should be worried about,
right.
making
Yeah.
sure it doesn't go sideways.
Yeah, I hope that he will. And I think we all, in the meantime, can hold our space and make it as peaceful and respectful and light giving as possible. Try to offer information to contrast the misinformation, try to offer light to contrast the heat. Barbara, you're a national treasure. It's what you've been doing for decades. Your public service is legendary. There's a reason why you have so much respect, especially among the uniformed services. It's because of the integrity you bring to everything. And frankly, it was probably all a warm up for this, Barbara. We're going to need you now more than ever. I hope folks will track everything you're doing, read anything you put out, and listen to every word you say. Really appreciate your patriotism, which is on full display now more than ever, Barbara.
Paul, thank you. It was a pleasure, and I look forward to the next time.
Thank you, my friend. Stay
All right.
vigilant.
You
Bye
take
bye.
care.